Last year, Chicago officials decided to close 49 public elementary schools and a high school program. Most of the schools were majority black. In New Orleans, most of the public schools are now charter schools. And schools in Newark, New Jersey, which are under state rather than local control, are undergoing a reorganizing that will close and consolidate a quarter of the district's schools. All three are the subjects of federal complaints filed this week by the Advancement Project and a coalition of community groups. The complaints claim that because African American students are disproportionately affected, the school closings and other changes violate Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in the use of federal funds. Judith, this morning, I want to listen just for a moment. Attorney General Eric Holder spoke at Morgan State and basically said there are structural reasons for our education problems. So I want to listen to that and then get your response.
Since the era of Brown, laws making classifications based on race have been subjected to a legal standard known as strict scrutiny. Almost invariably, these statutes, when tested, fail to pass constitutional muster. But there are other policies that too easily escape such scrutiny because they have the appearance of being race neutral. Their impacts, however, are anything but. And this is the concern we must contend with today. Policies that impede equal opportunity, in fact, if not in form.
So you're co-director of the Advancement Project. You filed a complaint with this guy, what he runs.
That's right.
He just said things that appear to be race neutral that have disparate impact. How optimistic are you?
Well, you know, it seems like school closings is the thing to do across the country. We're seeing it, you know, as you said, in Chicago, New Orleans, Philadelphia is another place. So what we filed was a complaint on behalf of Journey for Justice Alliance, which is an alliance of 22 cities of community folks who are fighting these school closings. We think that what we are doing is that 60 years after the decision, we're taking away educational opportunities of young people. We're closing down the schools. The Brown decision said that one of the most important functions of a state government is to provide education. But instead, what we're doing is we're turning it over to private entities, giving them the public money to actually siphon it off, and we're killing off our public school system. So we filed this on behalf of Black and Latino kids in these cities.
Okay, but everybody says this is school choice. School choice is good for school reform.
But in the meantime, years before they started mass school closures, they're disinvesting in the schools. You're losing the library. Then they point and say, well, you're failing. You need to close. And in the meanwhile, taking money from one pocket and slide it into the charter school movement and the privatization of public education. And so the question is, how much of it is calculated? How much of it is an effort to really destabilize it enough so now you can continue to fund the charter movement?
And one of the things that people don't know about these school closings is, so for example, in Chicago, Diet High School, 69 students left because they're phasing it out. Those children are taking gym online. They're taking art class online. What we're seeing is also a domino effect. You close one school, you shift them to another school, then you say, oh, that school's failing because you didn't provide resources. Then you label those children as failing, and then their next school gets closed, and so on and so on.
I do think it's a mistake, though, to think of school choice as an enemy to integration. I think it's a tool, and I think it can be a tool that is used to forward integration or to work against it and really further segregation. I think in theory, school choice, even charter schools, but especially magnet schools and other systems that allow parents to pick among options, could really promote integration. You could get kids from different neighborhoods and different backgrounds. You just need to have a public will to prioritize diversity, and then you need a strategy to make sure that that's controlled in terms of how students are recruited.
Is it a real choice when you close down every school in the neighborhood? There's a school desert, and our only choice is what you've given us. Is that a real choice?
That's what's happening in Chicago. I mean, Brownsville, which was where Richard Wright lived, was a thriving black community. It is going to have no neighborhood schools left.
We have a circumstance here where I constantly hear people of goodwill who want to do right, because you asked in part, like, how much is this engineered? But even if it's not, let's say that, like, there are some bad people in the private school market who are just there to profit, but there's a lot of people I meet who are like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to help the kids, and I'm going to. So what is the key to making reforms that are just, that have justice at the core of them, as well as quality education and the capacity for black and brown and white students to all be real citizens in this country?
I think that's an interesting question. I think one of the challenges is that you have a group of folks that we call neoliberals. Those are the folks that are interested in privatizing education. And in some places, the civil rights advocates have allied with them. And I've called that on my blog, Cloaking Inequity, a motley alliance. But what we have to understand is there's a lot of data. We have a lot of data on vouchers. We have a lot of data on charters. But what we used to call discrimination, we now call civil rights. Let me give you a couple of examples. For example, we talked about how African Americans and Latinos underperformed in high-stakes exams. Now we talked about the achievement gap as civil rights. Vouchers was for all deliberate slowness after Brown. We now talk about them as civil rights. Charter schools, we talk about those choices as civil rights. What we know about charters is that on average they underperform traditional public schools, and they're also more segregated. And then Teach for America, we're sending in teachers that have 5 weeks of training, and we're calling that civil rights. But all you have to do is look on the other side of the tracks, and you'll see none of those type of reforms.
And these are continuations of the policies of before Brown, right? And it's just that we still see Black and Latino children as not being worthy of a high-quality education. That is the thing we did not fix with Brown, and in order to do that, we have to get at hearts and minds.
How do we get at hearts and minds with? Because I like hearts and minds, because that's what I heard Flotus say. She was like, hearts and minds, First Lady. But then I also really appreciate that the Attorney General, who can sue some people, was like, and then we're going to sue some people. So is there a way to connect those two?
Yeah. I mean, I still come back to the fact that I think choice could be used as a really powerful tool. I think it's politically a lot more viable than a lot of other integration solutions. And I mean, one interesting place to look at that is Hartford, Connecticut, where there was a state desegregation case that resulted in over 50 magnet schools that serve Hartford and the surrounding areas, pulling kids from across those different districts. It's been hugely successful. Since 2007, the percentage of minority students in Hartford who are now in integrated settings has gone from less than 10% to more than 40%.
It's interesting that you bring up the politics of it, because the other place where there was success, where there was a clear effort and a successful integration of schools efforts, was Wake County in North Carolina. And Wake County, North Carolina really stood as this kind of beacon of the capacity to do this. And then what happens? The politics comes in and undoes it in the massive madness that is now North Carolina.
But you saw a great backlash.
Yeah, and then the people came back because they had changed hearts and minds,
and that's what's
at the same time. Yep. All right, they're screaming at me up there because I would just take the next 4 hours and they won't let me do that. Okay, I'd like to thank my guests, Judith Browne Dianis and Julian Vasquez-Halig, and also to Hallie Potter and to Tremaine Lee. Thank you all for being here on this topic. Sherilyn Ifill of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund is taking your questions exclusively on MSNBC.com. Visit speakout.msnbc.com to read her column and to leave your questions. Answers are going to be published later this week. Up next, my foot soldiers, neckties as activism.